Fort Weller sat on 1,900 acres of scrub and hardpan in the high desert, 40 miles from the nearest town that could call itself a town. By day it looked like every other mid-sized army installation in the country: motor pools, barracks, a commissary, a chapel, a flagpole that threw a long shadow across the parade field every evening at retreat. By night it looked like almost nothing at all: a scatter of sodium lights, the hum of transformers, the occasional sweep of a patrol vehicle's headlights along the perimeter road. On the night this story takes place, the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, and a woman named Staff Sergeant Dana Reyes was sitting alone in a windowless room the size of a two-car garage, wearing a headset and drinking coffee that had gone cold 2 hours earlier. Most of the base knew her as the comms operator, the radio girl, the one you called when your vehicle broke down on the training range, or when a gate sensor tripped, or when a soldier needed to be patched through to a family emergency line at 2 in the morning. What most of the base did not know, what almost no one on Fort Weller knew, was that 11 years earlier, Dana Reyes had worn a different tab on her shoulder. She had earned it at a school that broke most of the people who tried it. She had been a ranger. And in about 90 minutes, 6 armed men were going to cut the fence on the northeast perimeter, and they were going to find out. Music swells, then cuts hard to silence. ACT-1, the Quiet Life 0002. The woman at the radio. Dana Reyes was 36 years old, and she had made a deliberate decision some years back to become boring. That was the word she used for it privately: boring. She had spent the first stretch of her career being the opposite of boring, and it had cost her more than she was willing to say out loud. So when she came to Fort Weller, she took a job that kept her behind a console in a quiet room doing quiet work. She wore her uniform correctly. She kept her hair regulation. She said Roger and copy and standby a few hundred times a shift, and she went home to a small rental house off-post where she kept a dog named Biscuit and a garden that mostly refused to grow. The soldiers who came through the communications center liked her, in the mild way people like a reliable fixture. She was calm on the radio. She never panicked. When a young private got lost on a land navigation exercise and started to lose his composure over the net, it was Dana's voice that talked him down, steady and unhurried, until he found the road and the truck came for him. They did not know that the reason her voice never shook was that she had once talked to men over a radio while the ground shook around all of them, and she had learned that panic was a luxury the person holding the mic could not afford. They just knew she was good at her job. Sergeant First Class MABRY. The night shift at the comms center was rarely a solo affair, but that night it nearly was. Dana's usual partner, Specialist Akafer, had gone home sick at 1900 with what he swore was food poisoning, and what everyone else suspected was a bad batch of gas station sushi. That left Dana and one other soul in the building: Sergeant First Class Aaron Mabry, the senior NCO on duty, who spent most of the evening in the break room doing paperwork and complaining about the coffee. Mabry was a good man and a career soldier, 22 years in, 3 years from retirement. He was built like a man who had once been an athlete and had made a comfortable peace with no longer being one. He was not a shooter. He had not fired a weapon in anger in his entire career, and he was proud of that in his way. He liked the machinery of the Army, the schedules, the accountability, the sense of a large thing running because a lot of people did their small parts. At about 2100, he stuck his head into the radio room. "You good, Reyes?" "I'm good, Sergeant." "You want anything from the vending machine? I'm making the pilgrimage." "I'm good, thanks." He lingered a moment, the way people do when a long shift stretches ahead of them and they want a little human contact to break it up. Quiet night. "Quietest kind," Dana said. Neither of them knew how wrong that was going to turn out to be. The base at night. Music soft, patient. To understand what happened, You have to understand the shape of Fort Weller after dark. It was not a combat post. It was a training and support installation, which meant that the vast majority of its population went home or went to bed by a reasonable hour. The night was held together by a skeleton crew, a handful of gate guards, a roving military police patrol of 2 vehicles, a duty officer, the fire station, the medical clinic's overnight staff, and the comms center, which functioned in a sense as the base's nervous system. Every alarm, every gate, every emergency line ran through the room where Dana Reyes sat. The base had a security posture, of course, but security postures are built around expected threats, and no one seriously expected anyone to attack Fort Weller. It had no strategic weapons. It had no high-value prisoners. It was, on paper, one of the least interesting targets in the entire army. On paper. What the men cutting the fence knew, and what the base did not yet know, was that Fort Weller's arms room in Building 400 had just received a shipment 3 days earlier. A large one. And the people who had planned this night had spent months learning the base's rhythms, its shift changes, its blind spots, and the precise window in which the fewest people stood between them and that arms room. They had chosen well. They had chosen a night with a skeleton crew. They had not accounted for the radio girl, ACT-2, who she was 0009. The tab. Music shifts, something older, more searching. 11 years before that cold desert night, Dana Reyes had stood in a formation of soldiers at the end of a school most people have heard of and few people understand. Ranger School is not primarily a shooting school. It is a leadership school built on a foundation of controlled misery, sleep deprivation, hunger, endless movement under heavy loads, and the requirement to make sound decisions while your body is actively failing you. People wash out of it not because they can't shoot, but because, on hour 60 of no sleep, with no food in their stomachs, they lose the thread of who they are and what they're supposed to do. Dana had not lost the thread. She had held on to it through the mountains and through the swamps, through a patrol where she took over after 2 other soldiers were dropped for failing to lead, through a night so cold that men wept quietly in the dark. She held on because she had learned something about herself that most people go their whole lives without learning, that underneath the fear and the exhaustion, there was a version of her that simply did not quit. It wasn't brave, exactly. It was more stubborn than brave. It was a refusal. When they pinned the tab on her shoulder, she did not cry. She just felt, for the first time, that she knew what she was made of. The years after, she served, she deployed. She did things she was proud of and things she carried more quietly, the way anyone who has been to those places carries them. And then on her 3rd deployment, something happened. The narrator will not dwell on it in detail, because Dana herself did not dwell on it in detail, not out loud anyway. It is enough to say that a mission went wrong in a way that was not her fault, and people she was responsible for did not come home, and she spent a long time afterward learning the difference between guilt that is earned and guilt that simply attaches itself to survivors like a burr. She came back. She did the therapy, the real kind, the kind that helps. She got better in most of the ways a person can, but she also made a decision, a quiet, private, entirely rational decision, that she was done being at the tip of the spear. She had given that part of herself already. She had earned the right to be boring. So she cross-trained. She moved into communications. She took the assignment to Fort Weller specifically because it was quiet, because nothing ever happened there, because it was the kind of place a person could serve out the back half of a career in peace. She kept the tab in a drawer at home. She did not talk about it. New soldiers who worked with her had no idea. To them she was Staff Sergeant Reyes, the calm one on the radio, and that suited her perfectly. She had made herself into exactly what she wanted to be: safe, steady, and underestimated. The last of those was about to matter more than she could have imagined. What stays? Music, quiet, almost tender. Here is a thing that is true, and that the men cutting the fence did not know. because it is not the kind of thing you can learn from watching a base's schedule. You can leave the tip of the spear. You can put the tab in a drawer. You can retrain, relocate, and rebuild your life around a quieter center of gravity. But you cannot unlearn what your body learned in those years. The way your eyes go automatically to exits and angles when you walk into a room. The way you clock the layout of a space without meaning to. The way, when a loud sound cracks through the night, your body is already moving toward cover before your conscious mind has caught up. The reflexes don't leave. They just go to sleep. They lie down quietly under the surface of an ordinary life and they wait. Dana Reyes had spent 11 years letting them sleep. They were about to wake up. ACT 3, the cut fence 0016. 2140. At 2140, a sensor on the northeast perimeter registered a fault and went dark. It was not, in itself, alarming. Fort Weller's perimeter sensors were old, and they faulted regularly: a jackrabbit, a tumbleweed, a loose connection in a junction box that had been on the maintenance list for 2 years. When the alert flashed on Dana's console, her first assumption was the same one anyone would have made. Northeast fence line, sensor 4's showing a fault, she said into the net, keying up the MP patrol. Probably another rabbit. Can you swing by when you get a chance? Copy, came the reply from one of the patrol vehicles. We'll roll by, no rush. She logged it, routine. She went back to her coffee. But something small nagged at her. She could not have told you what in that first moment. Later, thinking back, she would identify it. Sensor 4 had faulted, and then 12 seconds later, Sensor 5, the next one down the line, had faulted too. Rabbits don't move in a straight line down a fence. Rabbits don't take out 2 sensors in sequence. Something moving, deliberately, down the fence line does. She sat forward. She did not raise the alarm yet. She had learned long ago not to cry wolf on a hunch. But she pulled up the sensor log and watched. 2144. Sensor 6 faulted. Then the camera feed on the northeast quadrant went to static. That was the moment Dana Reyes stopped being the radio girl. Music, low pulse enters. She keyed the net, and her voice, the same calm voice that had talked a lost private home, carried a new edge that anyone who had served with her in her old life would have recognized instantly. All stations, this is comms. I've got sequential sensor faults northeast, 4 through 6, and I've just lost camera coverage on that quadrant. I'm treating this as a possible intrusion. MP patrols, I need eyes on the northeast fence line now. Duty officer, you copying? A pause, then the duty officer groggy. Comms, you sure? Could be a maintenance. 3 sensors in sequence and a dead camera, sir. I'm sure enough. I'm requesting you initiate the recall. The reveal nobody was ready for. Sergeant First Class Mabry appeared in the doorway of the radio room, drawn by the change in her voice. What have we got? Dana didn't look up from the console. Her hands were moving across it, pulling up the base schematic, the gate statuses, the personnel on duty roster, with a speed and economy that Mabry had never seen from her. We've got people on the fence line, Sergeant, moving toward the interior, northeast quadrant. People, you mean like? I mean like a coordinated entry. They took the sensors in order and killed the camera. That's not kids. That's not a broken fence. Somebody planned this. Mabry stared at her. In 3 years of working nights with Dana Reyes, he had never once heard her talk like this. The calm was still there, but it had gone from the calm of a person who was relaxed to the calm of a person who was very, very focused. How do you know that? And Dana Reyes, for the first time in 11 years, said the thing she had put in a drawer. Because I used to do it, Sergeant. Now get me the duty officer and get every soul on this base who can hold a radio talking to me. We don't have much time. ACT 4, the plan against them 0024. 6 men. There were 6 of them. Dana didn't know that yet. She would piece it together over the next 20 minutes from fragments from the gaps in the camera coverage they created as they moved, from the sound one of the gate guards would report before he stopped reporting anything at all. But the narrator can tell you now. 6 men, well-equipped, well-rehearsed, moving in 2 elements of 3. They were not soldiers, but they were not amateurs either. They had trained. They had a plan, and their plan was good. Get in through the northeast quadrant during the skeleton crew window, move to building 400, breach the arms room, load out, and be gone through the same cut fence before the base could organize any meaningful response. They had studied the base's reaction times. They had built their timeline around the assumption that Fort Weller, at that hour, could not put together a coordinated defense before they were finished. The assumption was almost correct. It failed for exactly one reason, and her name was on a drawer at home, on a tab she never talked about. What she had and didn't. Music, tense, methodical. Dana took stock the way she'd been trained to, fast and honest. What she had, a base schematic she knew cold, a radio net that reached everyone on duty, a rough sense of the intruder's direction and speed, and herself, one person with skills 11 years out of practice but not, she was already discovering, gone. What she did not have, enough people. The base's entire on-duty security force amounted to 4 military police in 2 vehicles, a small number of gate guards, and a duty officer who had never in his career faced anything more serious than a drunk driving incident. There was no quick reaction force. The nearest real backup, the county sheriff and the state police, were 40 minutes out on a good night, and this was not a good night. She had radioed them the moment she was sure, and they were coming, but 40 minutes was 40 minutes. And the arms room, building 400, was maybe 8 minutes movement from where the intruders had entered. She did the math. The math was not good. If she fought the intruders directly for control of the base, she would lose because she had 4 MPs and a duty officer against 6 trained, equipped men, and she could not put those 4 people in the right places fast enough. So she decided not to fight them for the base. She decided to fight them for time. The insight. Here is the thing Dana understood that turned the whole night, and it came directly from the education the drawer represented. The intruders' greatest weapon was not their guns. It was their timeline. Their entire plan depended on speed, on being finished and gone before a response could coalesce. Every minute she could steal from them was a minute closer to the state police arriving, a minute closer to the base recall filling the streets with confused but present soldiers, a minute in which their neat plan curdled into chaos. She could not beat them, but she could make them slow. She could make them careful. She could turn 8 minutes of clean movement into 40 minutes of second-guessing. And a plan built on speed made slow is not a plan anymore. It's just 6 men in the open, far from their exit, running out of night. "Sergeant Mabry," she said, "I need you to do exactly what I tell you exactly when I tell you. Can you do that?" Mabry, to his eternal credit, did not argue. He had spent 22 years learning to recognize the one person in a room who actually knows what to do. He was looking at her. "Yeah," he said, "tell me what you need." ACT-5 buying time 0033. Killing the lights. The first thing Dana did was reach out, through the base's facility control interface, and start turning off Fort Weller's exterior lights. Not all at once. That would tell the intruders something was watching them. She did it the way a tired old base does it on its own, a bank here, a bank there, sodium lights guttering out in 1s and 2s, the kind of thing that happens when a transformer is failing. She darkened the northeast quadrant first, then the routes between the intruders and building 400. "You're making it harder to see them," Mabry said, watching the camera feeds go dark. "I'm making it harder for them to see," Dana said. "They don't have the base schematic memorized. I do. In the dark, I know where they are and they don't know where anything is. Darkness helps the person who knows the ground. That's us." The voice on the net. The second thing she did was more subtle and more her. She got on the base public address system, the old, tinny loudspeakers mounted on poles throughout the installation, the ones normally used for retreat and for the occasional test of the emergency broadcast, and she began, calmly, to talk. She did not announce that the base was under attack. She announced, in the flat official cadence of a routine drill, that Fort Weller was initiating a no-notice force protection exercise, that all personnel should report to their alarm condition delta muster points, and that the response force should establish the standard cordon. There was no response force. There was no standard cordon, but the intruders did not know that. Music, the tension turns a corner, something like grim satisfaction. Picture it from their side. You have cut the fence. You are moving in the dark toward your objective, on a timeline believing the base is asleep and undefended. And suddenly the loudspeakers come alive across the entire installation, calm and official, announcing an alarm condition and a response force and a cordon, the exact things your plan was built to avoid. Lights are failing in patterns you don't understand. Somewhere out in the dark, you have to assume, armed soldiers are moving to positions. Are they? You can't know. And that not knowing is a weight. It slows your feet. It makes you check corners you would have walked past. It makes you argue in whispers about whether to push on or pull back. Dana Reyes could not put a single armed soldier in the intruder's path in time. So she put the idea of an army in their heads instead. And the idea, in the dark, weighed just as much. Mabry's job. She gave Mabry a radio and a script. I need you to be 3 different patrols, she told him. Different call signs, different voices if you can manage it. You're going to report movement, report contacts, report a cordon setting up around the northeast and around Building 400. You're going to sound busy and coordinated and everywhere. If they're monitoring our freaks, and people who plan like this usually are, I want them to hear an entire response happening. Mabry blinked. You want me to fake a whole defense over the radio? I want you to fake a whole defense over the radio. He keyed the mic. His voice came out a little uneven on the first transmission, and Dana caught his eye and gave him a small nod steady, and on the second transmission he found it. Cordon element 2, moving to the northeast phase line, be advised we have friendlies converging from the motor pool side, watch your fires. He was, it turned out, rather good at it. For 22 years, Aaron Mabry had told himself he wasn't a shooter, wasn't a warrior, was just a man who kept the machinery running. On this night he discovered that keeping the machinery running was, sometimes, exactly the same thing as fighting, and that his part was no smaller for being spoken instead of shot. The real pieces. Dana was not only bluffing. A bluff with nothing behind it collapses the moment it's tested. So she took the few real pieces she had and placed them where they would do the most. Her 4 MPs she did not send charging into the dark. She placed them 2 vehicles, blacked out, engines off, at the 2 most likely approaches to Building 400 with strict instructions. Do not initiate. Observe, report, and if the intruders committed to the arms room, be the thing that turned the corner on them when they were most exposed. She was not spending her 4 people on the fence line. She was saving them for the one moment that mattered. The gate guards, she pulled inward and consolidated, so no one was isolated. The duty officer she kept on the phone with the state police, feeding them a live picture so that when they arrived they would not arrive blind. And herself, the one real, trained, dangerous asset on the entire base, she kept, for the moment exactly where she was, at the console at the center of the nervous system, seeing everything. That was the hardest discipline of all. Every reflex the drawer had given her wanted her out there, but she understood something the younger version of herself might not have. On this night, the most dangerous thing she could do with her training was not to fire a weapon. It was to think. One person thinking clearly, wired into everything, was worth more than one more rifle in the dark. For now, ACT-6, the plan comes apart. There's 0044. Doubt. Music slow build. The intruders reached the halfway point behind schedule. Dana watched their progress in negative, in the sensors they tripped, the dark spots they created, the moments the consolidated gate guards glimpsed movement, and reported it in the calm shorthand she drilled into them in the space of 10 minutes. She was building a picture, and the picture told her the thing she needed most to know. They had slowed down. They had slowed down because the night had stopped behaving the way their plan said it would. The lights failing in patterns, the loudspeakers and the alarm condition, the radio net alive with a coordinated response that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Somewhere in the dark, 2 of the 6 men were, at that moment, arguing in low voices about whether to abort. The narrator knows this. Dana only suspected it, but she suspected it correctly because she knew how the calculation went. She had made it herself once on the other side of other fences. When a plan built on speed loses its speed, doubt gets in, and doubt is corrosive. It eats the thing that made a group of men dangerous, their shared certainty. The split. Then the intruders made the mistake that trapped men make. Facing a situation that no longer matched their plan with their certainty cracking, they split their focus. Part of the group pushed on toward building 400 sunk cost, the pull of the objective, the refusal to have come all this way for nothing. And part of the group peeled off toward what they thought was the source of the response, toward the interior, toward the lights that hadn't gone out, toward the comm center, toward Dana. She saw it happen. She saw the dark spots split into 2 groups on her mental map, and she understood immediately what it meant, and a very old and very familiar cold settled over her, not fear exactly, but the thing that stands where fear would be in a person who has been here before. They were coming for the radio room, because someone among them had been smart enough to realize that the entire response, the whole impossible coordinated defense, was pouring out of one point on the base. Kill the nervous system and the body stops. It was, Dana thought with something almost like respect, exactly what she would have done. "Sergeant Mabry," she said quietly, "keep talking on that net. Do not stop no matter what you hear. 3 of them are coming here." Mabry went pale. "Coming here to this building." "To this building." "Raise," his voice dropped. I've never." "I know," she said, and then gently, the way she'd once talked a lost private home. "You don't have to. You have exactly one job, and it's the most important one on this base. You keep that response alive on the radio. Every word you say out there is worth more than a bullet. You keep our people believing there's an army in the dark, and you keep them believing it too. Can you do that for me?" A long beat. Mabry keyed the mic. His voice, when it came, was steady. "Cordon Element 3, be advised, converging on the interior, all elements maintain your sectors." He looked at her. "I've got the radio. Go do what you do." What she went and did. Music drops to almost nothing. Heartbeat. Dana Reyes stood up from the console she had hidden behind for 3 years. There was a weapon in the arms locker of the comm center. A single M4 and a limited amount of ammunition, kept for exactly the kind of contingency no one ever believed would come. She drew it, and her hands knew it before her mind did, the check and the charge and the press check happening in a sequence her body had performed 10,000 times a lifetime ago and had never actually forgotten. She was not going to hunt the 3 men. That wasn't the plan. The plan was the same as it had been all night, by time. The state police were now, by the duty officer's count, 11 minutes out. The base recall was slowly, clumsily putting real, confused soldiers into the streets. Every minute mattered. She was going to make the comms center take these 3 men longer to reach and enter than they had. She was going to turn one hallway and one doorway into a problem that swallowed their timeline whole. And she was going to do it the way she had been taught, in the dark, on ground she knew and they did not, against men whose certainty had already been cracked by a woman they'd never seen. She killed the interior lights of the building. She knew it blind. They would not. She positioned herself not at the door, the obvious place. The place they'd expect a defender, but down the corridor, at an angle that let her see anyone entering while she remained in shadow, with a hardened wall at her back and a fallback route she'd already chosen. Cover, angles, exits. The body remembered. Then she keyed her personal radio once, to Mabry, and said the last thing she would say for several minutes. "Keep talking." And she waited in the dark for the door. ACT 7, the doorway 0056. Entry. Music, silence, then a single low note. The narrator will describe what happened at the comms center with restraint, because Dana herself, when she later had to recount it, described it with restraint. Not because it wasn't violent, it was, but because people who have actually done these things rarely tell them as thrillers. They tell them flatly, because the flatness is a kind of respect for how serious it was. The three men reached the comms center at 4 minutes past the hour. They came to the door expecting one of two things: an empty building or a panicked support soldier they could overwhelm. Their whole understanding of the base's defense was that it was out there, in the cordon, in the response, not in here, in a dark administrative building with a radio antenna on the roof. They breached the outer door and moved into a building with no lights and no sound except, faintly, from a back room, the steady voice of a radio net that seemed to be running an entire operation. They moved toward it, because that was the objective, the source of the nervous system. They moved down a corridor they could not see, on ground they did not know, toward a woman they did not know was there, who could see them, and who did know the ground, and who had spent 11 years pretending she was not exactly the thing now waiting for them in the dark. The contact. It was over quickly, real ones usually are. The narrator will not choreograph it shot by shot, because that would be a lie about what it was like. It was not choreography. It was chaos compressed into a few seconds, the kind of few seconds that take a piece out of a person even when they win. What matters is this. Dana Reyes had every advantage that mattered. She saw them first. She knew the ground. She had prepared her position, and she had trained for exactly this at a level none of the three men had. Advantages in a fight are not fair. They are not supposed to be. The entire point of everything she had done that night was to stack every unfair advantage she could onto her side of the ledger before the shooting started, so that when it started, it would be short. It was short. When it was done, 2 of the 3 men were down and not getting up, and the third had done the only sane thing available to a man whose plan had died in a dark hallway. He had run, back the way he came, out into a night full of loudspeakers and failing lights and an army that mostly didn't exist, and straight into the 2 MP vehicles Dana had placed, blacked out and waiting, on the approach to Building 400. They took him without firing a shot. The others, the 3 men who had pushed on toward the arms room, never breached it. They arrived to find the approaches covered, not by the imaginary cordon, but by the real thing Dana had been saving all night, her 4 MPs in position, disciplined, waiting. And they arrived to the sound, over their own monitored radios, of a base defense that had somehow anticipated them, and of loudspeakers announcing that the response force had established its cordon, and to the first far-off wail of state police sirens coming up the access road at last. A plan built on speed made slow is not a plan anymore. It's just men in the open, far from the exit, out of night. They surrendered, all 3. There was a moment, the narrator is told, where it could have gone the other way, where one of them raised his weapon and the whole thing nearly became a bloodbath after all. But the MPs held their discipline, exactly as Dana had drilled them, and gave the men the one thing that lets frightened, cornered people choose surrender over suicide: a clear, calm, credible path to putting the weapons down and living. By the time the state police vehicles poured through the main gate, Fort Weller's crisis was already, essentially, over. It had lasted a little under 90 minutes. Not one member of the base's skeleton crew had been killed. The arms room stood untouched, and the woman at the center of it was sitting back down at her console, setting the M4 across her lap, and keying the net in a voice that had gone calm again. All the way calm, the way it always was, to begin the long, careful work of accounting for every soul on the base. All stations, this is comms. Stand by for a roll call. I need to know where everyone is. ACT-8 after 0106. The room. Music, something settling, exhaling. Sergeant First Class Mabry found her there, 20 minutes later, when the building was full of state police and jolted awake officers, and the particular electric confusion that follows a crisis nobody was ready for. He stood in the doorway of the radio room. She was still at the console. Her hands, he noticed, were not quite steady now that it was over, now that there was no one left to be steady for. That was when it hit him fully, what she had been holding back the entire night, and at what cost. "Raise," he said. She looked up. He didn't have words for it. 22 years, and he didn't have words for what he'd watched her do. How she had taken a base that could not defend itself and made it look, to the people attacking it, like a fortress, using nothing but a radio, a schematic, a set of loudspeakers, and whatever it was she kept in that drawer she'd finally opened. "Where'd you learn all that?" was what he finally managed. Dana Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she reached up and almost unconsciously touched her shoulder, the place where, 11 years ago, they had pinned a tab that she had put away and told herself she was done with. "A long time ago," she said, "in a place that took it out of me so it'd be there when I needed it." The reckoning. There were investigations, of course. There always are. In the days that followed, a great many people with a great many ranks came to Fort Weller to understand how 6 trained, equipped men had cut the fence on an American military installation, and how they had been stopped, comprehensively, by a skeleton crew that should not have been able to stop them. The answer they kept arriving at made some of them uncomfortable, because it was not a systems answer. It was not a matter of protocols or technology or funding, though all of those would be reviewed. The answer was that on the night it mattered, the right person had happened to be sitting at the right console, a person who, by every line in her personnel file, was a communications operator, and who, by every line that mattered, was something else entirely. They asked her more than once why she had never mentioned the tab, why she had let an entire base assume she was only what her current job said she was. She told them the truth, which was that she had wanted to be only that she had earned, she felt, the right to be quiet, that the drawer had not been shame, it had been rest. But she also told them the other thing, the thing that stayed with the people who heard it. "I put it away," she said. "I didn't throw it away. Those are different. You put something away because you might need it. I just hoped I wouldn't." What they learned about her and about themselves. Music warm, unhurried. The bass was different after. Not in a loud way. There was no parade, no speech. Dana would have hated that and quietly declined it, which she did when it was offered. But the soldiers who worked with her looked at her differently now, and she felt it, and she made a kind of peace with it. The radio girl was still the radio girl. She still said Roger and copy and stand by a few hundred times a shift. She still went home to Biscuit and the garden that refused to grow. But the young private she talked home from the land nav range, who was, it turned out, one of the confused soldiers who'd stumbled into the street during the recall that night, started coming by the comms center on his off hours just to sit and learn. And she taught him, not the shooting, the other thing, the thinking, the way you clock a room, the way you buy time when you don't have force, the way you stay calm on the mic because the person holding the mic doesn't get to panic, the way an ordinary job, done by someone who is quietly more than their job, can be the thing a whole base leans on when the night goes wrong. And Sergeant First Class Mabry, 3 years from a retirement he had always imagined as an ending, found himself thinking of it differently. He had spent a career telling himself he was just the man who kept the machinery running. On one cold desert night, keeping the machinery running being 3 fake patrols on a radio, holding an imaginary army together with nothing but his voice while a woman went into the dark, had been the difference between an arms room lost and an arms room held. He did not feel like a warrior exactly, but he no longer felt like just anything. None of them did. Last scene. The story ends where it started, in a windowless room the size of a two-car garage, with a woman at a console, wearing a headset drinking coffee that had gone cold. It is another night weeks later. Quiet. The quietest kind. Somewhere out on the perimeter, a sensor faults a jackrabbit, a tumbleweed, a loose connection in a junction box that is finally, after this whole ordeal, near the top of the maintenance list. The alert flashes on Dana Reyes' console. She sits forward. She watches. She waits to see if a second sensor faults in sequence. It doesn't, just the one, just a rabbit this time. She logs it, routine. She keys the net, calm as still water. MP Patrol, sensor 4's showing a fault on the northeast line. Probably a rabbit. Swing by when you get a chance. No rush. Copy, comes the reply. No rush. And Staff Sergeant Dana Reyes, the radio girl, the comms operator, the Army Ranger nobody knew they had, leans back in her chair, in the quiet room at the center of the sleeping base, and keeps watch over all of them, the way she always has. The way it turns out she always will.